All right, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to O-Scale Central's monthly online program for the Sunday, May 18, 2025 edition. Thank you all for joining us. I'm David Vaughn. For those of you who are new or newish to the program, welcome. O-Scale 2-Rail, or OS2R, is a model railroad scale of a 1/4 inch to the foot, or 1:48 proportion. It includes various gauges. We modestly think that OS2R is the best of all scales of model railroading. It's also model railroading's best kept secret, and we are trying to fix that. We need to spread the word how great the scale is and support people who are modeling in the scale. Our support includes building a community of modelers and providing assistance to them. Our hobby is about the people who are doing the modeling, the friendships we make, and the enjoyment we share. O-Scale Central is a 501c3 nonprofit tax-exempt corporation, and we are working as indicated both to help the scale and to help the people. Our website, which we would love to share with you, is oscalecentral.com. The website focuses on describing OS2R, provides resources to help modelers get started in the scale and to assist current modelers. The site includes an introductory video, a list of coming O-Scale events, and an O-Scale product and service guide, which is free to use and free for vendors to be listed. Member benefits include our quarterly journal, our monthly newsletter, both designed to keep modelers up to date, a password-protected membership list, and numerous additional programs. OScaleCentral.com also provides information on how to join O-Scale Central, so you can become a member and help us with the mission that we have been on. You can join and receive all of the benefits described for a price beginning at $24 a year. So check us out at oscalecentral.com. O-Scale Central brings this online program to the OS2R community and to modelers curious about the scale as a service. You do not have to be a member to participate, although we hope you'll look at the good things OSC does and consider joining us. Thanks. We have a busy program today, so let's get to it. We'll start with a quick review of coming events and announcements, and then turn to Andy Edelman, who is the primary public face and chief marketer for the Atlas Model Railroad Company, which is the largest producer of OS2R models. He will give us an update on where Atlas is and what is coming, including some very topical information on tariffs and the possible impact of tariffs on models, shipments, and prices. Andy is a very experienced and knowledgeable player in the model railroading industry and will give us some keen insights. Our second presentation today will be from well-known OS2R historian Kerry Williams. O-Scale models have been produced for over a century. The origins of the scale are fascinating in their own right, and they also help to shape how the scale has developed. Kerry's slides and narrative, and many of the models he'll be talking about are from his own collection, will give us just a neat insight as to where the scale came from and how we got to where we are. For both, excuse me, can you all mute yourself? Thank you. For both Andy and Kerry, we will save time for questions. I have not one, but two apologies. The first is for the technical glitch we had last month, which required us to switch a one-click link and meeting ID. We sent out a last-minute correction, but I know some of you missed it. and we apologize for that. I think we have resolved the issue. Second, we do record our programs for editing and upload to YouTube for rebroadcast, and there are several times as many people who view our programs on YouTube as actually physically attend at the price of some delay in getting the word out. The links are available through our website and directly through YouTube's. We have frankly missed some handoffs in the editing and posting process, and we are not yet posted for any of the 2025 programs. We will be attending to this. Look at us to get up to date within the next couple of weeks. As part of our larger look at inventory and collections, insuring them, and ultimately dealing with our models and our layouts in advance of having our estates have to deal with it, or our spouses, we were to have a representative from one of the large collectibles insurance companies, and we have simply not been able to close the loop on that. It's not from lack of trying. We will just have to kick that down the road. This is also our last opportunity to plug O-Scale West, which is the West Coast's biggest OS2R show and dates all the way back to 1991. It takes place at the Hyatt Regency Santa Clara in California on May 23 to 25. Schedule and details of the show are available through their website, oscalewest.com. You can also get plugged in that way through oscalecentral.com's coming events list. O-Scale West is far more than a train show. It has clinics, layout tours, a model contest, and this year includes a tour of the Niles Canyon Railway Brightside Yard and Shops, which is a hidden gem of a railroad and museum. It has 24 locomotives, some of which are historically significant. The tour is included in the price of admission and is well worth a visit. This meet deserves the support of all OS2R modelers. California is a hotbed of other railroad activities. If you're from the West Coast, don't miss it. If you're from further away, you can still make it on an impulse trip. I went last year from Maryland, and I consider the trip and the show well worth it. This will also look ahead to next month's program, which will take place on Sunday, June 15. Please note that the show will be a week earlier than usual. Our first guest on that show is already signed up, and that will be Scott Mann of Sunset Third Rail. Sunset Third Rail, as you know, imports OS2R locomotives, passenger cars, and trains. Scott has been on the program a couple of times before. He always has good insights and candid assessments. We're still working on our next program guest. I think we're going to be able to do Al Puglisi. Al is doing layout videos as well as working with Howard Zane on Howard's structure business. And he did a very nice video on Ed Rapay's Pennsylvania Railroad, which has been featured in Model Railroader last year. 2,700 square feet of highly detailed, state-of-the-art Pennsylvania OS2R engines, cars, layout, and operations. So we will certainly be working to make sure we can finalize Al's participation. He'll also tell us about the larger work that he's doing to try and document a lot of OS2R layouts. It may be something that people are interested in participating themselves. Well, let's head on now over to Andy Edelman to hear from and about Atlas as well as the larger issues. Andy owns Prime Mover Communications and handles marketing for Atlas and MTH. Andy, welcome. Tell us what's going on.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate the invite as always. I've enjoyed coming on here a couple of times before, and happy to kind of give everybody a rundown on where things are with the tariffs, where the manufacturing pauses are, and what Atlas is doing to handle all of that. It's kind of a similar story with MTH. Frankly, all of the manufacturers are kind of in the same boat. I've been doing this for 45 years. Started working for Williams in 1980, and I was building trains at that point in time. I needed a summer job before I went to college, and I was putting sheet metal together for 10-plate trains, running a rivet machine to put pickup rollers together, grinding truck sides and GG1 bodies for paint. I mean, I did it all, and it wasn't too long after that that the migration to Asia started. And that was mainly because the domestic manufacturing was running into issues with sourcing the companies that could do injection plastic, die cast, stamp metal for the 10-plate stuff that Williams did back in the 80s. And that evolution kind of transpired to where we are today, which is most of the product being produced in Asia, whether it be China or South Korea. Some of the companies have migrated to Vietnam for part of their product lines. But the bottom line is almost everything now comes from Asia. And when these tariffs were bandied about back in the first Trump administration, the entire hobby industry got a nice carve out because they realized that all the manufacturing was done over there, and it would be very impactful to not only the manufacturer slash importers, the Lionels, the MTHs, the Atlases, and whatnot, but it would also affect the hobby shops and so forth. So they carved out the whole industry, and same with the hobby business in general, because all of that product was over there. And really, because of the decision to not carve out any of those categories, blanket tariffs for all industries, the 145% that was established for China was really kind of a potential death knell for the model train business because the products just couldn't deal with that kind of markups that would have happened. So really, there was a pause as far as all the manufacturers go. Atlas and MTH and Lionel and the rest of them simply stopped bringing product in because they just couldn't deal with it. And as a result, there's going to be a window here over the next 60 days, 90 days, where you won't see product coming in because it has stopped shipping out of Asia. And we did get some good news. Don't know how long that's going to last from the administration last week that will allow the importation of product to come back in, albeit at a markup. So what I'll do real quick here is just kind of go through what the process is in terms of how these tariffs are handled by all the manufacturers, the impact that they have on you guys, and then where people are at. And I'll kind of jump around the little outline that I put together. I sent it to David. One of the things that people were waiting on is the spring catalog from Atlas. As you know, one was published in January. We worked on that for them. And we finished up the spring catalog in early April. And immediately after that, the reciprocal tariffs were granted at 145%, and Atlas decided they would not announce any new products. And that catalog was frozen. MTH is a little bit different. They do weekly announcements, and they decided, no, we'll keep announcing stuff for now and see how that goes. Lionel quit announcing things. I think Scale Trains, same thing. I don't know what Scott Mann's doing, but regardless, it just caused everybody to take a step back. So a spring catalog is ready to go as soon as Atlas decides what's going on with these tariffs. Just so everybody understands, when a container comes into the port, the manufacturer, U.S. customer, importer, whatever you want to call all of these companies, cannot get that container into their building until all of the taxes are paid, the port fees, all of the associated fees that go with having a container get cleared through customs, including the tariffs. So under no circumstances is anybody paying that tariff bill except for Atlas or Lionel or MTH or the rest of them. And when they're 30%, they can kind of deal with it. When they're 145%, it doesn't work. Just simple math, $20 boxcar, let's say it costs to manufacture $20. And I'm just pulling these numbers out, so don't write home about them being what the cost of the cars are. At 145%, that car now costs Atlas $49. If they were giving, had an MSRP of say $80, and they were giving the dealers 40% discount, which is a normal discount in the hobby world, they lost $1 on every car if they did not pass on the cost of that 145% tariff. So that $80 car becomes approximately $150 MSRP car. And they don't think, TH doesn't think, nobody thinks that the market will bear those kind of prices if the tariffs were to stay at that level. So everybody's pleased that there's a pause. They've been reset back to 30%. Ideally, they go to zero like they did the first administration, because this market cannot deal with the tariffs at all without passing on some or all of the costs. People will always say, well, why are you in Asia anyway? And as I addressed at the beginning, having built trains, having dealt with the subcontractors that Williams used back in the 80s, those small places don't like the quantities that our market really requires. This isn't a huge market. When a manufacturer builds a car, they might build 500 or 600 of them, maybe 1,000, and divide it up into half a dozen road names, and sometimes more than that. So it's a few hundred of each paint scheme at most. And the small companies that you would use to build that stuff domestically won't do quantities like that. So that's part of the reason why everybody moved to Asia 40 years ago. Then you factor in the fact that when you get into Asia, certainly in China, your tools don't leave China. They can move around in China, but they can't come out, which means if you were to try to move manufacturing to another country, or to try to do it in the US, if you could find subcontractors, you'd have to retool. And that's a huge proposition. When MTH downsized in 2021, they had about $60 million in tools. That's what it cost them. And it would cost them more than that to retool today if they wanted to do that in the US. It's just a non-starter. So really the only solution is to deal with the tariffs, hope that they won't really be as high as they are at 30%, and share some of the costs of those with the consumer. So you're going to see products start to come back as a result of this 90-day hold at 30%. I know all the manufacturers are going to continue to or start to bring product back in. So over the course of the next 60 days to 90 days, we'll see some stuff come in. If no settlement can come from the negotiations that the administration will do with China, and the tariffs go back up, then everybody will pause again and reevaluate on what to do. So
Andy, what was the reason why the tools are trapped in China?
That's just the way China works. So once your tools are there, they won't let them out of the country. I think
is that because of ownership?
Yeah, they're a communist country. I mean, let's face it, that's the way that they support their own domestic manufacturing base. And, the benefits for an Atlas or an MTH or whatever to use China is they can get the product built at price points. And by the way, when you look at price points today, I mean, they've gone up considerably over the last 30 years, right? So it's not like they're super cheap anymore, but they are far cheaper than they would be if they were built elsewhere.
Just a very, very difficult guy to handle.
Yes. Yeah, it's a quandary for everybody, and it's where we're stuck. And as I try to point out to people all the time, it's been something that everybody's been dealing with for 40 years. And so now we're stuck with where we're at, and there's no easy solution other than hope that the administration and the Chinese and the Koreans and the Vietnamese will come to negotiations that work for everybody. And we get what the administration is trying to accomplish. It just doesn't really fit into the hobby business because everything is locked up over there. And to start up manufacturing in this country would be just as expensive as it would be to pay the 145% tariffs, if not a lot more. Worse, it would take years to do. So there'd be this huge, window of lost opportunity to build products and promote them and sell them to the consumer base. So it's kind of, you're between a rock and a hard place, and all you can try to do is deal with it.
Andy, can you tell us a little bit, without getting into the weeds, about the Hobby Industry Coalition and how it has tried to attack the problems that are being presented?
So what David's referring to is a coalition of manufacturers and dealers and movers and shakers in the industry that have kind of bound themselves together to try to present a united front and really point out the benefits of the hobby and who we are, and that we're a small group of consumers and manufacturers, and push that out so that the public in general knows about us. The politicians know about us, and hopefully that goes into, some thought process as far as the negotiations go. A similar thing happened in the first administration, and that's really what led to the carve out of the hobby category. And again, this go around that doesn't seem to be as important. It's a bigger statement that they're trying to make in terms of returning manufacturing to the U.S. and as I said, it's just not working for the hobby industry. So that coalition, they put together some videos. There's some major players from the various manufacturers. Atlas certainly was prominently part of that video, and they have a website, and darned if I know the URL off the top of my head, but if you just Google it, you'll find it, where you can sign up to just have your kind of like a what do they call those things? Sign up thing for support. And so that's a good thing for the industry. Everybody recognizes how bad this could be. And when I say bad, if they can't resolve it and the tariff numbers jump back up, it does not bode well for our industry, and a lot of companies will cease to stay in business, and a lot of dealers will cease to stay in business, and that would be just catastrophic. Having been involved in it in so long, I worry greatly about the impacts that could have on it. It's, of all the things that we've gone through over my 45 years in the industry, this is by far and away the most damaging. COVID was great for our industry because everybody stayed home. Bad for other industries, but for ours, great. But this is by far and away probably a death knell if it can't get resolved.
Andy,
yes.
The URL is hobbycoalition.org.
There you go.
Spelled just the way it sounds.
Yeah. So I would encourage people to go in there if you haven't already and sign up for it. And that'll at least build the coalition strength up with folks who understand and appreciate where we're at with all of this. Now, as I said, the administration did last Monday announce a pause and a return to the lower tariff level of 30% in hopes that negotiations between China and the U.S. Will continue. And believe me, there's a lot of things that the Chinese do wrong, not the least of which is the fact that we can't get our tooling out if we wanted to. But there's bad things about Chinese government and how they've impacted manufacturing and affected the U.S. So we don't sit there and go, no, you can't mess with them. There's questions that need to be answered. So I think everybody agrees with the general philosophy of it. It's just the impact that it has on our industry is catastrophic. But the fact that they did announce a pause, as I said, will mean that the products will start coming back out. The production facilities, certainly for Atlas and MTH, because they share a facility. I believe Lionel, they don't use the same facility, but I believe these companies have continued to put together and assemble and manufacture products that were in the queue, even though their customers, their Atlas and MTH and Lionel customers, were not saying ship the product. There was a freeze on that. So they were really kind of taking a risk that this would get resolved to some manner where Atlas and the rest of them would say, okay, start shipping again. So that's a good sign, because that means that the gap in product getting shipped out of Asia to the US won't be as bad as it could have been. When COVID hit, we did have a pretty significant pause because COVID hit worldwide and China sent their employees home just like the US did, and it took a while to spool back up. That hasn't happened, and that's important because when it happened during COVID, it took a while to get people back up to speed. They had to hire new people and train them, and so it took a while. So that did not happen here so far, and that's a good thing because that would have meant a longer delay. And you know, how deep everybody's pockets are to continue to pay their employees domestically, how well the dealers can do with no product coming in. Do they have enough inventory on hand? I know the manufacturers don't have a lot of inventory. Certainly MTH never does. Atlas builds pretty much to order. Lionel builds pretty much to order. I know that the last shipment that Atlas got, they froze the cost, the selling price on them. So there was no tariff increases on that stuff, and whatever that is in inventory that remains today, they're honoring those old prices. But anything that's gonna come in now from this point forward will reflect to some degree the tariff increase. And if it changes and goes up, those prices will get adjusted if they haven't shipped already. And by shipped, I mean, as soon as they leave the ports in Asia, the tariff rate is whatever it is. Unless it gets eliminated, I think, but it won't go up. So if a container's on the water right now, it's coming in at 30%. If a container doesn't leave until July, or let's see, when is this 90-day in? August, September? And it goes up to 50%, then those prices will reflect that. And then the manufacturers may go, whoa, we got to wait again, because now we're getting into a position where the retail price is going to be much higher, and we don't know where people will be in terms of their ability to or desire to purchase these models at these higher prices. So you're going to see these shipments come in. Atlas is in fact going to announce their new catalog supposedly later this week. That was the message that I got on Friday. I don't know if that's still the case. And they usually do publish on their website, and we typically do a live stream to announce that product. Jared Hedrick at Atlas did tell me under no circumstances am I to reveal what's in the catalog. So I'm sorry about that, but he wants to hold that close to the vest.
Oh, come on, Andy.
I hear you.
It's just
Here's what-
us. It's
Here's
just
what I'll
us.
tell you. Here's what
We
I'll
won't
tell
tell.
you. There's a new diesel locomotive in it. There's a return of another engine that people have been asking for, and there's a bunch of rolling stock. So that's what I'll tell you. And we can look at it when it gets announced later in the week. If it's not this week, then it'll certainly be next week. But that's the message that I got on Friday afternoon in regard to this presentation today. So you're going to see stuff. MTH continues to do their weekly announcements, so we didn't really miss anything there. But they are in the process of managing or changing price points for items that are being affected by these 30% tariffs that are due to come in. And I assume that Lionel will do the same, and the rest of the guys will do the same. So that's kind of where we're at. It's been, when David asked me to come on, I was like, well, I hope I don't come on and have to have nothing but bad news. At least this pause is some, sign of hope that things will get better, and hopefully get to a point where, we get a reasonable number. If their sole intention is to, get some revenue from tariffs, then a lower number will probably be what it is. If their sole intention is to drive manufacturing back to the States, I don't think that happens in our industry, and I don't know how we deal with that. But so there's kind of good and bad with where we're at today, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed and hope it continues to become better news as we get through the summer.
Well,
So,
thank you, Andy.
yep,
I appreciate that. A couple of things. One, Atlas has previously announced a very nice 60-foot modern boxcar. So that was carried over from the earlier announcements and is presumably not under embargo. And a little bird told me that there is an Alco C424 master line engine that is in the pipeline, and that the Weaver consolidation is about to be reissued, having been upgraded. Andy cannot confirm any of that. I understand it. I wouldn't want to get him in trouble.
The Weaver consolidation was announced last year, and it is due to exit production anytime now. So it will be coming this summer. Everything is done with that. We finished the sound sets up for that a couple of weeks ago. That 424 I thought was announced last summer as well, and that should be coming. And the stuff that was in the January catalog, none of that's been in the production line yet. So really, Atlas is running, and they're typical, the same with MTH and Lionel, 6 to 9 months post announcement when the product starts to show up. And actually, I think that 280 was announced in April of 2024. So it's been a year since they announced that. But that engine is done, and it should be going on a container sometime over the next 60 days or so. And it's a pretty cool piece. I was surprised at how nice it was, given how old it was, that tooling. And so anyway, you're going to see new stuff that was announced that hasn't been built yet, or is being built, that was announced sometime over the last 6 to 9 months, or in the case of the 280 a year ago. So there is stuff coming. Whatever was announced in January, none of that's in the production line right now. And obviously everything in this new catalog will be coming out probably at this point, not until Q1 to Q2 of 2026, given the delay and stuff. But there's some neat things. So in a week, you'll see it.
Well, there's several reading the tea leaves aspect to this, and I won't ask Andy to comment on it directly, although he's free to. One is, this is the C424 from last year was the first Atlas Masterline engine for quite a while, at least 5 or 6 years. And at one point, the problem was not the tooling, it was that there was no manufacturing facility that was equipped to run the to run the master line, whereas MTH had kept its manufacturing capability largely in place. So that's a very good sign. I hope that people will support the reemergence of the master line by buying the engines. Alco Century 424s are always been a cool model, and the Atlas rendition was a good one. So I hope that people will pick it up when they eventually do come in. Second, there had been something of a black hole with all of the Weaver tooling. Nobody knew, whether it would come back, if so, when it would come back, if so, what would come back. And the fact that the consolidation is out there. And I believe there may be at least one more ex-Weaver freight car that was in the January catalog that we looked forward to. But some of this is sort of looking at and trying to figure out things from inside baseball that are happening. And as I said, I don't think Andy is going to be in a position to comment on some of those things, but you can look at this and at least intuit some of the things that are likely to happen.
Fair enough.
Okay. Now, we do have some time for questions, and here is going to be the rule. There are two ways to raise your hands in Zoom. One of them is like this, and the other is to go to the icons that are along the bottom of your screen, and about 40% of the way over from the left is a little heart symbol, and it says react. And one of the things that you can do is go on that and find where it says wave your hand or request recognition. I've forgotten how it's phrased, but you'll figure it out. And if you click on that, you will be put in the list to be called on. I note, for example, that Carl Blum in my upper left-hand corner, it may or may not be in yours, has one of these little yellow hands, and that's cool. The one thing you need to do, whether you're going to do raising your hand or using the electronic hand, is you need your video on, if you can. Apparently you can do it without the video, but it's going to be harder to recognize you. Anyway, Andy, are you up for a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's start with Carl Blum, whose hand is raised.
Yeah, so as a previous tool maker, I'd like to point out that replacing the tooling that's been made in China would probably cost maybe 10 times as much to make it here in the States. Plus, then you'd still have the assembly costs of American workers versus the Chinese workers. So, you know, the cost of the product would be extremely prohibitive if they're made here in the States.
No, Carl's absolutely correct. If the product is made domestically, it's going to cost more. And it'll probably cost more than even the 145% tariff that they were putting on the product earlier this spring. So there's not going to be a situation where we get cheaper trains. We're trying to get trains that are reasonably priced at this point for our industry. And then again, that's the whole hobby industry. It's not just the model train industry. It's the whole doggone hobby industry that is affected by this. But Carl's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
And
Dan, go ahead.
Our expectations have changed too. You know, a Lionel car with a metal bottom and some trucks on it.
Oops. Carl, you have muted yourself, or something. Something has muted. It wasn't us, but something happened. Try again with unmuted. There you go.
Yeah. You know, Lionel used to make a boxcar, you know, one plastic molding with a metal base and a couple trucks thrown on it. And that was an acceptable toy. But, you know, we're not in the toy realm any longer.
Nope, you're absolutely correct about that. The intricacy level is unbelievable today compared to what it was when I started in 1980, putting together the old Bakelite Madison cars, you know, which were repros of Lionel Madison cars, or even the little GG1, super simple compared to what they are today. So all of that adds to the complexity of and the difficulty of manufacturing domestically, or frankly overseas. But they can do it cheaper overseas because of, you know, we don't have the tooling investments already been made, and obviously the labor rate is cheaper.
Dan, you've got your hand up.
Yes.
Dan?
Yes. So with this whole tariff thing, it seems to be on again, off again, on again, off again, to the point where it's kind of hard to keep track where we stand. So assuming, I guess what boils down to is this: we're in this reprieve period. Does the coalition have a plan B if suddenly we're back in the on again scenario where, you know, we go 3 months out, 90 days, and the word at that point is 145%?
Yeah, the coalition, their goal is to get a carve out. And they're you know, part of their whole mission is to get in front of the people that may have some input into it. And part of that could be the big mass retailers. Trump met with the Home Depot and I think Amazon and some of these other ones. And, he needs to talk to Hobby Lobby, for example. Now, they're not carrying two-rail O-scale super detailed models, but they do carry trains. And I mean, there are all kinds of companies that carry trains. Ollie's, the discount Ollie's, they sell a battery operated train that Lionel makes for them, and big numbers of those. And they get affected by that. So there's a whole reason to continue the dialogue, and they are continuing the dialogue, trying to get in front of these people, get in front of their the local representatives, their state senators and whatnot, to try to push this dialogue that this industry would be catastrophically harmed if big tariff numbers were reestablished.
Russell Courtenay, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Greetings from Idaho. So a couple things. First of all, when I was a contractor in the 90s, we were looking to get hats and shirts and those kind of things custom made, and they're available US made, high quality cotton for $1 more than the Chinese product. Well, the next year, late 90s, we checked again, the US made product was no longer available because no one would pay the extra dollar, is what it was at the time. It was shocking to me because I thought buck a piece, 30, 40 bucks extra, not a big deal. Unfortunately, most of our products our customers are very price sensitive. And so on that note, I was thinking very long term. I know a lot of electronics companies where I've been involved, they're diversifying all around the world, Mexico, Canada, Eastern Europe, wherever else, to try and have other bases for the products, especially during the pandemic when they had the real bad transportation issues with China. Is there any kind of long-term possible plan for the hobby industry to do something like that?
Well, you've seen some of the importers, try to move into some other countries, and Vietnam is one of them. And that's kind of like, to me, that's kind of like going back to South Korea back in 1986, I think, when Williams first started doing brass engines. I believe it was 86. Might have been 84 actually, and it was it was an interesting time because the they didn't know a lot about trains, and the quality was suspect. I can remember putting back together brass locomotives that had come in from South Korea at that point in time. So the point I'm making is there has been movement on some of the companies to look at something other than China. Again, MTH is in South Korea, has been for years, but the bulk of their product comes from China. MTH is Premier Line steam locomotives, of which they used to do 2-rail SKUs as well as 3-rail SKUs, all came from South Korea and continues to come today. Lionel, same thing, they're in South Korea. Broadway Limited, they're in South Korea, as well as in China for their HO lineup. So there's been some diversification that way in terms of sourcing, but it's still all overseas. And I think there was a time where Atlas had gone to a whole slew of different companies in China to just keep from having everything in one basket, so to speak. So that was a form of diversification, just to keep from getting messed up if a manufacturing facility went out of business. So there's been some of that, but it's a challenge. You mentioned the electronic components. That was a big problem with COVID. It wasn't so much because of the sourcing, it was because of the model train industry is a little man on a totem pole. And when it came to getting circuit boards for sound systems, you couldn't get the processors because the demand was such a big backlog because of the shutdown. And that's one of the reasons why it took almost a year for locomotives to start showing up from Atlas and from MTH with the Protosound system. So part of that just goes back to what I was trying to get at earlier with sourcing domestically, trying to find subcontractors that would deal with our small quantities. Similar thing with the electronics. So some push to diversify, but it's still a problem. And really the biggest portion of the problem is the size of our target market. It's just not a huge marketplace. And we're talking about quantities in the hundreds, maybe a few thousand here and there when you're doing a real cheap battery operated train set for Ollie's. But for the most part, pretty small quantities, difficult to source.
Yeah, and it seems like the knowledge, you have to build that wherever you're building. It has to have the knowledge to be able to do this product. If they don't have it, you got to build it. That can take years.
Yes.
I was thinking about 15-inch gauge trains. Cast steel couplers are really important. And the company in California I visited, they could not find any company in the United States that would make 200 to 300 cast steel couplers, which is a big contract. So if I did find a company in Mexico able to do it, but to actually build this knowledge at a new company or a new manufacturing with the small quantities we have, it would take decades, if at all.
Yep. Yeah, it's a long-term
Right.
deal.
Thank you, Russell. Ross Dando, you got a question or a comment?
Yeah, hello from Idaho. So the Idaho contingency is here. Andy, this is not a tariff or manufacturing question. It's a upgrading fine scale question. As HO moved more towards fine scale and the rivet counters like Scale Trains does, I understand that the market that you're primarily getting your bread and butter from is more in the durable goods side of thing where it has to last. But with the increase of two-rail O-scale modelers, sort of looking for finer detail. And one of the questions I have is, with the acquisition of MTH, there's some good models there, but the see-through screens and things like that are very wrong. And tooling up pieces to include the fine scale aspects of that would be
You are on the screen here.
be a
Hang
great
on, let me
idea.
get it up.
So just as if you can help us improving the fine scale aspects of some of your existing models. I mean, the Jeep 35, the SW1, I'm mostly on an AMD guy, so the 424 was really nice. Those locomotives are fantastic. There's some items in the MTH line, if they were to have some updating and not have bent sheet metal handrails, it'd really make things nicer.
Sure.
So
Sure.
just putting a plug in for that, and thank you for picking that line up and helping to consolidate and keep things going.
Yep, there's been a little bit of that. It's a little harder on some of the diesels that Atlas bought from MTH because of the nature of the tooling and how old it was. If there weren't slides in there to change out things, that was an issue. But they've made some changes. The P42 Genesis, for example, they tooled up a new pilot for that so they could offer it in two-rail. MTH never did it that way. The PS1 boxcar, Atlas has made new doors. So there's a number of different doors now that they can offer to more adhere to prototype. And things like the screens and stuff like that should not be that big of a deal. But with locomotives, it's all going to hinge on what they can do with the tooling and how much change it can accept. What was the other one? The E8, the Premier E8 that Atlas bought. They either removed or added portholes on the side of it, depending on the road name. And that required a pretty significant investment in the tool. And one of the things that Atlas has a benefit over that MTH did not, and still doesn't to this point in time, is Atlas bought those tools, as did Lionel, whatever tools they bought from MTH, pretty inexpensively. And so, when you're looking at investing and improving the model, it's not like you're investing a huge amount of money because you're not starting from scratch. You've already got the core tool, and if it's got slides built into it, it's easy enough to add the other things. And again, somebody else mentioned earlier today about the evolution of the industry and the consumer, and we've become more picky and we want more adherence to scale and all of that. That didn't exist 30 years ago when MTH tooled up some of these models. That E8, for example, came out originally in the late 90s, if I recall. And they weren't thinking about slides and different portholes on the side of it and so forth. So Atlas, because they got into it cheaper, and I think Lionel's done the same thing with some of the ones that they bought, you are seeing some improvements. And I no question, there are other areas that they could address that I'm sure that they will. The truck on the rolling stock now has operating roller bearings. It didn't have that when they bought that truck from MTH. So you're seeing things, and I think you'll continue to see things that show improvement and an evolution of the product line. I've been pretty impressed with Atlas's interest in it. They've been impressed with the sales response that they've gotten from buying the MTH tools. They continue, obviously, to support the two-rail segment of the marketplace, something that MTH got away from. And I don't see MTH going back to that. Maybe they will, but I don't see it. So there's good things happening for the two-rail segment or the scale high rail segment, whatever you want to call it, that I think will continue to expand upon as we go through the next couple of years, assuming we get through all of this stuff.
Okay.
We're
That's
we're
great.
gonna need to move along. I do want to leave Andy with three pieces of feedback that I get, and we'll pass along to him. One, there is a lovely Alco S2 switcher that I believe is from MTH tooling that is being offered. And it's a shame that it is only being offered in 3-rail. It is a very nice model. And I hope that maybe on the next run, somebody will figure out 2-rail. Second, to the extent that sound modules cannot be completed, as I know there was a bunch in Thailand. One of your Atlas's suppliers wasn't able to get the sound units or the DCC in. There is a sizable market still in O-scale 2-rail for models that are just DC, either because there are people who still run just DC, or because we want something else in terms of a system other than DCS or what is going to come from the factory. So we can be your people if you've got models sitting on the end of the production line that you can't sell because you don't have any electronics on them. And the third thing is, and this is a lobbying effort that people have been working with for years. Bring the SW8, SW9 back. It's the greatest mass-produced mechanism in the scale. And I don't remember when we had our last run, but it's got to have been close to 10 years. So we get that all the time. Is why don't they bring back the Atlas switcher?
I'm sure you're going to see that one for sure.
Good, yeah. Good. Well, you can. I noticed that we've got over 60 folks on the call today, and that's a very nice crowd. We appreciate the support, and hopefully Atlas will understand that not only do we have a bunch of interested people on the call, but we will get a lot more when we get the program recorded and available on YouTube.
Great.
Thank you, Andy. Really appreciate your time and your insight.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, let's turn from a catch up and look forward on OS2R to a look back to the very dawn of O-scale 2-rail. And our guide from this review is Kerry Williams, whose fascination with the very early years of our scale have resulted in both a lot of insight and historical research, as well as just a great collection of models from that era. He has put together a PowerPoint and has a well thought out narrative to go along with it. Now, Kerry is, I think, probably even less technologically proficient than I am, and that's going a long way. And we had the magic trick, and that was Kerry brought his grandson yesterday. And so we have his technical assistance, and this is coming in a little bit side wampus, the PowerPoint is coming through Carrie's computer, which doesn't have a camera, but Carrie is doing his audio on the cell phone. So we've worked this twice, and it worked. It worked okay. But I cross your fingers and let's see if it works. Carrie, are you ready to go?
Yes, David, thank you very much. Let
All
me
right.
go to share. Share. Can you see my beginning screen?
Yes. It says
Oh,
vintage
good.
O scale 1924 to 55. Carrie,
Beautiful,
take it
beautiful.
away.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. David, thank you very much for hosting the meeting. Appreciate hearing about Atlas's progress with the hobby. So we're going to go back in time. O-Scale's been around for a long, long time, over 100 years now. But before there was O-Scale, of course, there was just model trains and toy trains. So, okay, now we have to figure out. There we go. I apologize. So we have the birth. There's always been an interest in model and miniature trains, going back to 1830s when the Baldwin of Baldwin Locomotive made a train for the Peel Museum in Philadelphia. So there's always been an interest in miniatures. Shriver in Denver area started manufacturing miniature trains, putting them in Uliches, and then getting them in other various parks for amusement. So the idea of a small train, ride on a train, but you're putting models in front of people started creating this interest in models themselves. We, of course, do electric trains, and for that you need electricity. We take it, of course, for granted today, but you go back to turn of the century, that was not the case. So you had less than 3% of Americans at the turn of the century that had electricity in their home. There was a huge rush to put electricity in the homes, but it wasn't until the 1920s that over 50% of America had electricity. So you started out with batteries, with dry cells batteries, wet cell batteries. The first real practical transformer was introduced around 1910. And exponentially, electric trains took off from that point. Carlisle and Finch started in 1896 with DC 2-rail trains. And it wasn't until the cursed center third rail really was introduced kind of concurrently in Germany and in America, roughly in the 1905 to 1906 period, that 2-rail fell out of fashion. Now, we, of course, know our gauge as O-scale. However, it was really kind of a derogatory term. It's called zero gauge. So in 1892, you had the establishment of the gauges over in Germany with Markland. You had 1 gauge, 2 gauge, 3 gauge, 4 gauge, 5 gauge. These are all bigger gauges. It's not so much, yes, it's size, but it's also price point. And then for the bottom feeders, they came out with 0 gauge. Yes, 0 gauge. So affectionately, of course, we renamed it to O gauge, which does not infer the lowest totem pole figure. Here's the original O gauge Markland engine and train from 1892 to about 1896. America started doing O gauge trains in 1901 with Ives. These are, of course, all wind up. John Swartzall in Washington, D.C. is given the title of kind of the beginning of O-scale, roughly around 1918, producing his own engines, kind of modifying some tin plate pieces. He did do center third rail, kind of an invisible wire. This is in the basement of his home in D.C. The real coalition of the hobby regarding all modelers was put together in a paper form called Model Maker. 2 English gentlemen came over and started putting the small publication together. And it was the voice, it was the Bible for the entire hobby. So yes, you can make stationary engines, you could make gliders, you can make cars, boats, and trains. So this gave everybody a voice. It was printed out of New York. and the publication spread around the world, but it gave everybody an idea of what your neighbor was doing. And it started to put people, again, with other people, clubs starting to form, but you had a common point of view. People started submitting their pictures on their projects and spurring interest throughout the country. Paul Egoff started commercially pursuing O-scale. He filed a patent in 1922, and you can see from the patent here, it's basically a conventional scale model where you have your motor at a kind of an incline, and you have a drive shaft going down to, at this case, the center axle driving the engine. He also had lit headlights. You're picking up from the center third rail at this point. He also has a light in the firebox. He also established smoke in the tender. We don't know, or smoke in coming out of the chimney. We don't know exactly how he did it. I do have the remains of one engine that does have smoke. And he started advertising in 1926, establishing the O72, which was a bump up from standard gauge, which was 42-inch diameter, and O gauge, which was around 30-inch diameter. Here's a Paul Egoff center third rail K4. And you can see it's rather crude compared to today's models, of course. And don't bother counting rivets. They're rather oversized. But you have the basic O-scale concept. You have, at this time, a brass channel chassis, cast drivers, and a sheet metal body all formed. And this was the state of the art pretty much in O-scaling in 1926 to 1928 in America. The hobby was kind of torn between 1/4-inch and 1/2-inch scale, and live steam was really the heyday. If you're a real man, you ran live steam. Electric trains were pretty much for the, well, choose your own title. Anyhow, 1/4-inch really proved to be a bit too small for a practical live steam, so that really became the mainstay for electricity, and 1/2-inch was pretty much the smallest for live steam. Here you have a photo of a Frank Birch 1/2-inch scale in the back. These were kits you could purchase in the way of castings. And then the one in front here is a Roy Ashley. Again, you could buy it a kit or you could buy it ready built. If you're buying it ready built, this is going to set you back around $200 around 1928. This is serious, serious money. Regarding sales of these things, they would do a run of castings, roughly 50 set of castings, and then try to sell them. You find very, very few of these engines today. A builder's a builder is a builder. So you have a lot of people that were handy with their hands building other things. Gliders and planes were a big thing in the 20s, a huge thing. Everyone was fascinated with early flight. And Fred Icken in New Jersey was a glider builder for people, for rich folks. So he decided when that started faltering that he'd want to model trains. So he put out his own production line in the Palisades Park area. His early examples are pretty kind of on the rough side, but then he partnered with a gentleman named Barker, and who was a fine tool maker, and really upped the grade quite a bit. Now you're still doing inside third rail at this point, but at least 072 for your radius or for your diameter. Here's an example of an Icken Barker engine. You, at this point, starting in 29, you go to outside third rail. Your hobby is really centered physically in the Manhattan area, to Connecticut, to Philadelphia, a little bit down to DC. That's your real hub. Then, of course, you have a little bit in Chicago and then San Francisco. So between New York, in the corridor, outside third rail is acceptable. Not so much on steam engines, but it's certainly acceptable on electric engines. So to get away from the stigma of the center third rail, they take the rail chairs and move the rail to the outside. And that pretty much started in about 1929. This very thin, small gear here, Icken decided to do double gear reduction, which allows a conventional motor to be geared down so you have very realistic startups. And some of these even will coast nicely. So they're really quite nice running engines. And Iken established his trade on, if you buy an Iken engine, it's going to outlast you. And they're flawlessly running engines. You paid a premium for them, but again, your grandchildren will be running the same thing long after your room temperature. Ed Alexander was another major builder, starting in 1928. He initially was importing Bing HO engines, and then O gauge, and then some of the standard gauge stuff, half-inch stuff. But he started establishing, really just finalizing into the quarter-inch scale, manufacturing his own, and then partnering with Iken and also Egoff for a short while to manufacture his line. He was in the New Rochelle area and had some very well-tailored clientele, and was able to make inroads with a lot of the railroads. So he was able to contract with a lot of the big layouts, commercial layouts that were available in the 30s. Here's an example of one of his private custom-built engines for the Pennsylvania Railroad, which he built 3 of these. These were built before the actual S1 was actually produced. So he was able to get plans for the Pennsylvania Railroad. One of these went to the Pennsylvania Railroad, one went to this display of the Pennsylvania Railroad in New York, and the other was out on Treasure Island at the Pennsylvania Railroad display out there. But again, he was dealing with the well-tailored, very rich and wealthy clientele. Bottom feeders need not apply. Minton Cronkite had a very successful electric company in the Connecticut area. And he sold that out in 28 and had a big pocket of money. And he was happy to spend that on model trains. So beginning in January of 1929, he hosted a huge fair, the Miniature Fair of the Iron Horse, which is kind of a play on the B&O Fair of the Iron Horse that happened a couple years earlier. And all the who's who, the what's of the hobby migrated to this show. It was kind of the first O-scale show, and everyone saw the competition. Well, as soon as you see what the other guy is making, you get ideas, you want to up your game, and immediately the quality starts jumping up. At this fair in January 29, his Minton's layout was outside third rail, O gauge. We'll talk about Q gauge later, but this is O gauge. And you can see Minton here. He did, of course, move to California. We'll cover that shortly. Minton, when he sold his electric company, took the head engineer from the company with him, the gentleman named Otto. And Minton wasn't altogether happy with what was on the production line from the various manufacturers at that time. So he put Otto to work, starting making trains for him for his own consumption. And here's an example of an Otto-built mountain that from 1934 that he had running on his layout when he moved out to California starting in 1931. He escaped the East Coast and went to the West Coast. But it wasn't until 1935 that he got out a tape measure and realized that quarter-inch scale does not go on 1 1/4-inch track. It goes on 1 3/16 track. So instead of rescaling everything, he decided to create Q gauge, similar to what you have with P48 today, but he called it Q gauge at the time. And there was a bit of a ruffle throughout the hobby regarding this, but he was probably the largest advocate for Q gauge, but it didn't go very far. Grovan brought out their own catalog full of various trains. Most of the things that they brought out were to try to correct the hobby's misfortunes. So Ed Alexander had sand cast passenger cars, which were quite heavy. Minton didn't like that. He wanted lighter cars, so they came out with stamped aluminum cars, much, much lighter, but these are very incredibly expensive cars. So you're like $30 a car back in 1930, 31. This is serious money. The average per people were not going into O-scale. This is pretty much just the rich folks. The New York Society of Model Engineers initially were anything that you wanted to model was great and wonderful, and we, bring in your traction engine, bring in your plane, bring in this, bring in that, but it quickly gravitated to model trains. So in 1931 here, 29, right shortly thereafter Minton's fair, they had their own fair, and they set up a temporary oval layout down in downtown Manhattan. So downtown Manhattan, all their members were well tailored. These were rich folks that were not going to be affected so much by the depression that was coming on. And they gathered together, put this huge show on, and they attracted thousands and thousands of people. This is the day before television, so people would come out and gather, and they would go to this wonderful show, and they'd see examples, again, showing the public examples of the wonderful work that two hands can create. Of course, the Hudson is the pinnacle of the engine in many people's eyes during the 30s. It was a German company that was the first to produce it in O gauge, not so much scale, but O gauge, and that goes in 1932. The Germans were in a major depression in the 20s. Prior to World War I, they were the major importer of cheap trains into America and some high-end trains, but World War I took care of that, and so there was nothing coming in. In the 1920s, they started coming in again, but America enacted tariffs to prevent them from bringing things in. So Richard Marklin was on hard ropes, and he started trying to cater to the booming scale market, and he brought in the Hudson and also a Commodore Vanderbilt and a couple Pullman cars. But the market was very small, as is for the other manufacturers of O scale. It was just too expensive for the average person. But here's an example of their engine from 1932. 1933, the hobby has a huge shot of adrenaline. The World's Fair in Chicago, the Century of Progress opens, attracting somewhere around 30 million people. It runs from 33 to 34. And part of this is the transportation. Right now in 33, the depression is booming. People are not happy. People are depressed. People have no money, but they can scrape up a few bucks to go to this fair. And things are bright and wonderful and great and streamlined in Art Deco. And the railroads are trying to promote their own, come on, ride a train. Come on, we're wonderful people, go take a ride, blah, blah, blah. So they put these huge layouts together. Alexander puts together a huge C&O layout, a traveling layout. The Pennsylvania has a large layout, and the IC has a large layout. The IC layout is actually two rail. It's the first commercial showing of two rail in O scale. The other two layouts were outside third rail. Iken does all the re-engineering on these. Scalecraft claims that they did the engines for Pennsylvania, which is correct. However, they had to be remotored and powered by Iken so they would survive. The trains were running for 10 to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 6 months. That's a lot of wear. Iken engines will take it as long as you keep oiling them. They won't even know what's happening. All the other things will just break down. They introduced ball bearings in the trucks for the freight cars and the passenger cars, which both Alexander and Walthers at this time offered that as an option. They were quite expensive, but they were ball bearing wheels in some of these cars. And the C&O layout here, which is pictured here, which is done by Alexander, and he provided most of the freight cars for a lot of the layouts. This was a portable layout. So in 1933, they have this beautiful C&O layout, but they had plans for taking it across the country out along the C&O route. So they disassemble it and take it on the route. Well, American Flyer, yes, that American Flyer, the Timplay people, were over in the toy department out on Treasure Island in 33, but in 1934, they have this void from the C&O, so they cram in the American Flyer, huge standard gauge layout, into the C&O space. So when you go into the transportation building, you see the Pennsylvania layout, you see the IC layout, beautiful scale models, trundling along, nicely detailed, scale scenery, blah, blah, blah. And then you go to the American Fire layout running a standard gauge trains, and it looks like mailboxes racing around chasing each other. Well, this was the death knell of standard gauge. This is also the death knell of the tin plate looking tin trains, because people went, whoa, I could have had a V8. So the whole interest is going into scale, and you can read contemporary readings in the model railroader, craftsman, whatever, that they reflect back of going to 1933 or 34 and seeing the exhibits here and how it influenced them. And they went home to their layout in the basement or their attic or their Christmas display around the tree. And all of a sudden, this ain't going to cut it no more. So a lot of them either modified their trains to make them more scale or scrapped whatever they had and went to scale itself. Here you see the comparison between standard gauge and O gauge. Standard gauge was introduced at the end of 1906 by Lionel. It was big and massive. And as you can see here, we have two Blue Comet engines. The rear engine is a Boucher engine introduced in early 1930. That was about the most expensive engine you could buy in standard gauge. And then the one in front here, that's Warren Crater's 1933 Blue Comet, where he had the plans to build this in the first year of model craftsman. So you can see the comparison and why the standard gauge would disappear. O scale at this time, and by 33, you have an 8-foot circle as your minimum, where if you wanted to do a scale in standard gauge, which they did a little bit, you need about a 12-foot circle, which is really not a practical thing for a lot of American homes. 1933, September, Model Craftsman comes out. So now you have model maker kind of fades away. They're really too small. One of the partners passes away. The other partner can't do it on his own. So Craftsman comes in, which was everything. You make ashtrays, you make end tables, you make boats, you make cars, you make trains, and trains really started to. So it was really became the prominent coverage of the magazines. Here in Chicago, C.H. Smith, American Model Engineering with Scalecraft. They introduced their K4, which was ran at the Pennsylvania display in 1933 in Chicago. It was 1764, which, yes, it actually do get a ruler out. 1764 is the proper scale. But whoever designed their Hudson in 35 decided to go with 1/4 inch. The Hudson is a sand cast bronze, where the K4 is sheet brass. January 34, the first issue of Model Railroader comes out. Kalmbach, who was a printer, and he was a heck of a marketer. Oh my God, whatever the topic was secondary. He was a marketing manager. He was incredibly good with the marketing. So he starts out with 100 copies, sends it out the first of the year, and by the end of the year, he's over 1,000 subscriptions. By I think it was like 39, he's up to around 9,000 subscriptions. But this man had a pulse on the hobby, and with that, he would constantly do surveys to find out what people wanted to see, what they wanted to have, what they wanted to buy, and the astute manufacturers would pay attention to this and bring out what the people wanted to buy. Bill Waller's up here in Milwaukee. He was a standard gauge man, a real template devotee, but he was all about signals for a long time. And he started going into the scale world. He produced scale track for standard gauge trains with outside third rail in the early 30s. He would make custom layouts. But at the end of 1934, he was asked to design a city of Portland. So he comes up with the city of Portland in 1/4 inch scale. And in Popular Popular Science, it publishes an article on how to do this yourself. And then shortly thereafter, he comes out with plans that you can build this yourself at home or buy a ready-built engine. So here you can dramatically see in the photo, Bill Waller's train in front, which is 1/4 inch scale, full scale length. And then the Lionel one, which came out concurrently at the same time at the end of 1934, that's 17/64th scale on the castings, but it's truncated to take the 072 curve, which of course at the time, Josh Cohen was thrilled that he could try to get his trains drawn at 072. That was like a big scale going up from 30-inch up to 6 foot. So here you can dramatically see the two difference. Of course, the Walthers, if it was true scale on, it would be 17/64, but he was a 1/4-inch man, so here we have this dramatic comparison. Now, the Walthers example cost you over $60 if you were going to buy it ready to run from Milwaukee. The Lionel one with a loop of track cost you $19.50. You want to know who sold more of them? That's right. That's why you don't see the Walthers. So 1935, the guns are coming out for 17/64 versus 1/4-inch. Libby Green out of Cleveland, who was quite a salesman. He came from the auto industry. He produced a K4, okay, actually a K5, sorry, a K5 and the Hudson in glorious 17/64. These are cast aluminum, beautiful models. They run wonderfully, and they're 17/64. They're absolutely marvelous. Once you see 17/64, you'll never go back. Anyhow, he brings out these two models. Of course, he's underfunded, but he brings out these lovely models that you're actually able to put together pretty much with a screwdriver in cast aluminum. So they don't quite have the detail that he was hoping for, but they're pretty darn nice. And the scale continues, the battles continue between 17/64 and 1/4-inch. So Libby Green does get a little bit of support in the 17/64 war. Here we have Acme, Roy Robbins, also in Ohio. He has his foot in both sides. He does 1/4-inch and also 17/64 cast aluminum. He advertised a lot, but very few models of his still survive. 1930s, after the success of the World's Fair, you have huge traveling layouts. You have the C&O one, which left the Century of Progress and started traveling across the East Coast. And of course, the B&O, not to be outdone, comes out with their own the following year in 35. Here we have the B&O traveling layout, and they contract with Ken Henry out of Baltimore to produce engines and also to sometimes travel the layout to keep it maintained. And the layout traveled up around the B&O system, very successful. And this layout went through several configurations. This is a very early configuration shown in the photo here. But it's still running today in Cincinnati, and I suggest and highly recommend going to the Cincinnati Union Depot, which is marvelous architecture itself. But between Thanksgiving and Christmas, they run the original outside third rail layout, running many of Ken Henry's original engines from the 30s. He also had suspension on one of the axles, so they're very good and reliable engines. Now, those that couldn't afford Alexander or Icken or Ken Henry or anybody else had to rely on their own ingenuity. So here's two examples of scratch-built engines. The one on the top there will run all day long. It's really a wonder of architectural ingenuity. But the cars are just blocks of wood and nails for rivets on the side. Homemade trucks, homemade wheels, everything's homemade. The one on the bottom's a little step up. That's a William Crooks. That was done in 1938, when shortly after the plans for it showed up in Model Craftsman. Jack Ferris in Huntington, Indiana, with the help of Bill Lenore, formed Scale Model Railways Association in 1935 in beautiful Huntington, Indiana, producing a huge line of trains. Now, everybody produced the K4. Pennsylvania was a huge railroad, and everybody wanted to model the Pennsylvania, and it still does. I mean, it's probably the favorite of all modelers. And then a distant second is New York Central. So everyone did the K4. Everyone did the Hudson. And scale model railway or scale model railways did everybody else. So they're doing the odd engines from the New York Central. They're doing Wabash. They're doing Erie, some Illinois Central engines, which is wonderful and great that they offer these, but there's so few customers that are going to buy these unique engines that their customers are very, very few. They're expensive engines. And so the customers they had were like Kimball from Kimball Piano here in Chicago, Samuel Ansel, you might know him. He had a couple of electric trains, 12-inch to the foot scale, and the governor's son from Michigan, the head of an appliance company. So if you were really rich, you were catering to these scale model railways would cater. They build custom locomotives for you, but otherwise they would sell you a chassis. So they're desperate to try to make money. And Bill Lenore did some beautiful designs, but again, there's just not the market. But the neat option here is this large photo here. For $5, you got a working reverse gear. So that reverse gear there, when you throw that valve gear manually with your little finger, it throws the electric reverse, which is hooked up to the motor. So this was a good investment for $5. It has high play value. Now, Lionel comes out with the city of Portland in 1934. Joshua was influenced greatly by the New York Society of Model Engineers. So he wanted to be accepted in that world. I mean, Josh had made quite a few trains in his life. So he would go to the organization and go, oh, you got this layout, but I don't see any of my trains here. And they would take him to the side and go, you need to make something that looks real. So he comes out with the city of Portland. And the city of Portland at 1764 says, wonderful. One of the members takes the train and makes it for outside third rail, and they run the city of Portland on the New York Society of Model Engineering's layout. Josh is thrilled. Oh, he's so happy. He's so happy. So what does he do? The following year comes out with a Hiawatha, and it's scale 1764's body. It's absolutely lovely, but the cars are kind of an embarrassment. So Walthers fixes that problem, and he comes out with the cars to go behind the Lionel engine, and everybody's happy again. And here you have an example of the Detroit layout with the Hiawatha snaking through the Walthers cars. Out on the West Coast, you have Roland Lowball, who started producing O-scale and also 1764s, which is your basic standard gauge. So you can see standard gauge scale does get rather large. And then you have one of their models underneath. So the standard gauge car from Roland Lowball would cost you about $30 built up, hand lettered, absolutely beautiful. And then the one that is sitting on the O-scale engine, scale boxcar, built up, that would be about $15. So this is serious money in the 30s. This is why Westbrook was able to sell their boxcar kits for $2 and $3. Lots of them. So you find zillions and zillions of Westbrook kits. You don't find very many Lowball cars. So here you have Lowball and you have Faber, who did a lot of the brass stampings for Roland Lowball. Roland may not have been the easiest person to get along with because he had a lot of talent come through his hands and then go out and start on their own. So that was Faber in 1940. He left Roland and started producing his own cars and own brass stampings. Minton Cronkite, here we have, along with Alexander on the East Coast doing their layouts, Minton Cronkite on the West Coast doing layouts. So he did a big layout in San Diego, the Santa Fe, the TP, Texas and Pacific in 1935, another one in 36 for Santa Fe. He does these huge commercial layouts, which attracts and are seen by millions and millions of people. And Minton Cronkite, with his layouts, it's not like a Plasticville layout where you're trying to cram as much crap onto a layout as you can. You space it out. You have some open areas, just like the real world. So you have a couple cornfields, and then you have an empty area, and then you have some vastness, and then you have some industry. Give the world a little more realistic look here. So here you have Minton. He had a very large layout out in California. And Interurbans and trolleys were also very popular. This was a way, if you had limited budget and limited space, you would get into interurbans and trolleys. So the first commercially produced O-scale was a Druck in 1764. 1764 was pretty popular in trolleys for a while. But in November 1935, here you have a Druck. It's sand cast aluminum. Elliott Donnelly, who had lots of money. Unfortunately, he was born into that type of thing in the printing industry here in Chicago, and he loved double O. So he wanted to produce a double O system, but the struggling company here in Chicago was Scalecraft and Smith. So Donnelly, being an astute businessman, he said, you know, why don't I get an established name before I bring out my double O line? So he buys Scalecraft, and he inherits a gentleman by the name of Red Adams, who is all about Southern Pacific. So all of a sudden you have a Southern Pacific mountain being produced in Chicago, and that was the first engine that Elliott designed at the end of, actually it was designed by Red Adams, but Elliott produced it at the end of 1936. Almost to the month, the same engine is produced by Roland Lobau out in San Francisco. Little corporate espionage, we don't know, but nonetheless, both engines came out within a month of each other. Here you have Elliott handing out passes. Elliott was all about promoting the hobby. He traveled across the country extensively. Of course, he was burdened with being rich, so he could do such things. But he was a big, big promoter of O-scale. And ultimately of double O also, but we're not going there. But the O-scale, he came out with time payments, so people that he produced a kit at roughly $50, $60, $70. So he would do scale payments, so you could buy it on, pay in time. He also was able to, because he was burdened by having neighbors of like Fields and Sears, the mass retail company up where he lived in Lake Forest, he was able to get Scalecraft trains in the Field department store down on State Street. You had the birth of hobby shops in the mid-30s, and department stores pretty much just had toy trains at the Christmas period. And they wanted to try to expand to get model trains into the hobby section. So with the birth of the hobby store, Elliott was able to get a toy store for adults, a hobby section in the Fields and ultimately Sears downtown, where year round you would have these examples of scale models, AE Scalecraft, to be able to purchase to appease the fathers of the children that were over in the toy department. Also, for a while, Sears carried Scalecraft models in their Christmas catalog. Here we have Lee B. Green again in spring of 1937. He decides to jump from sand cast aluminum to die cast to get those rivet counts up. Again, 1764, beautiful engines. He contracted with Congress Tool and Die, a company up in Detroit, still around, making carburetors and high-end die-cast things for the automobile industry. This die-cast does not go bad. When was the last time you saw a carburetor go bad? If you make die-cast right, it does not go bad. So anyhow, these engines are great, wonderful. Unfortunately, Lee B. Green was not able to raise enough money to pay the bill. So he lost the company to Congress Tool and Die, and Congress Tool and Die overnight found themselves in the O-scale business. So prior to Lionel coming out with their Hudson, there were about 8 other Hudsons that had been in the O-scale world before Lionel showed up with theirs. But the mini scale one is really an excellent example, and it's in, of course, glorious 1764s. Walthers, not to be outdone, decides to come out with a steam engine. So Walthers rarely came up with their own product. They like to buy other people's products and then advertise it as their own. So they come up with a Mikado, a heavy Mikado, and it's the Crestline line. But Mikado is actually just an Acme, Roy Robbins out of Ohio. So they take over the Mikado and introduce that. This in kit form costs more than a ready-to-build 700E Lionel. And of course, Walters does come out with their trolleys because he was also a big trolley guy, and trolleys were really, or interurbans were very popular up in Milwaukee at the local club there. So they were a big advocate for interurbans. And here you can see the dramatic difference between quarter inch and 1764. So Roland Lowball in 37 comes up with the Southern Pacific 060. That would be the big one on the left. Post-war, 1764s had pretty much vanished from the world. So they redesign it and it comes out in quarter inch. That's that little one on the right. So, but you can see the overhang on the rails. That when you see a real locomotive, you have overhang. Not so much on quarter inch. So December 1937, of course, Lionel's given credit. Oh, they came out with the first Hudson, blah, 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 blah. 1937. Well, yes, they did come out with a Hudson in 1937, but it wasn't until the second week in December that you were able to actually buy the engine. So there was actually 2 weeks in December of 1937 that you could purchase the engine. It was really 1938 that it had its heyday. So to actually make any money, because they're not going to sell very many at $75. Full-scale engine, of course, who's going to run it? Yes, the rich people from the scale world would jump on this, but they sold a lot more 7063s, which were half price. So you have a little less detail. You have the deeper flange wheels, blah, 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 and it's selling for half price. Well, that's pretty darn successful. You had a lot of O-scalers buy it and then modify it. So you buy a Hudson, you cut it all up, and you turn it into something else, and you have a real cheap model to start with. So even though it was introduced in 1930, at the end of 1937, it really had its coming out party at the March New York Society of Metal Engineering and Hobby Show in March of 38. And here you can have people, a picture of the show. They have a big O-scale layout there. There also is a HO layout and a double O layout. We'll go back here for one moment. This Lionel exhibit over here, you proudly see their Hudson, which they're very, very proud of. You see their solid T-rail track, which they're very, very proud of. In addition to this on its display, they have their Hiawatha engine and the city of Portland. That's all they showed at the show. They did not even confess to making tinplate. Another traveling exhibit down here in the lower right is Haverly's layout. It was a little southern layout, and he would travel all over the Southern Railroad, setting up his layout, and at Christmas set it up at various department stores, again promoting, but he was a 1764 man. Oh, he was, yes, all about 1764s. 1937, Gilbert takes over the American Flyer line from Chicago, and they introduce 1764's 060, and they kind of come out with a Hudson. It's not really a Hudson, but they called it a Hudson. But this was good fodder for the burgeoning O-scale people in the O-scale market, because they could take these engines and cut them up. These engines only cost like $12 to $15 a piece. So you could cut them up and do whatever you want to them without looking back. And you had a pretty decent scale engine after you did some work on it, and it didn't cost you an arm and a leg. Parmley and Sturgis comes out with this beautiful bronze E3. And then the Bedell Electric comes out here in bronze. Now you can actually use outside third rail. Again, this was all in the corridor area where things were acceptable. So much, not so much in Peoria, but in the corridor area of between Philadelphia and Boston, outside third rail was pretty hip, and these were very, very popular. Did I don't think I covered this. Okay, NMRA introduces Haverly was the first president of NMRA in 1935. They have their meeting up in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, and all the heads and the who's and the what's all get together, and they come up with standards for heights of couplers, depths of flanges, back-to-back they established everything down to the minute detail that we, of course, enjoy today. Because before that, it was the wild, wild west. You had couplers up, you had couplers down, you had different coupler standards for grappling each other. You had different flanges, you had different frogs, you had different rail. It was just, you try to run one thing with another thing, and it ain't going to happen. So they come up with all these wonderful standards that we are, of course, blessed with today. So you can grab anything off the shelf in your collection that was done with these NRA standards and run it with something else, and it runs on the same track. It's great, it's wonderful, wonderful. Except for the scale, a little thing like the scale. So if you go back to NRA, even to today, what scale is acceptable in O scale? Well, it's 1/4 inch or 17/64. That's the only thing they could not establish a definitive standard for. So 1939, the World's Fair in New York and also Treasure Island out in San Francisco area are booming. So they're going to have some big layouts. Trains are still hip and happening. They're doing major exhibits and displays. Multiplex, Crispin Valve in Pennsylvania, who's still in business today. They make valves for the railroad industry. There were two brothers that ran the company, very wealthy, and they figured everyone in O scale was rich and wealthy too. So they come up with this multiplex track, because track has always been a bugaboo for the O scale. I mean, you can be rich and famous, but you don't have the time to put together, hand laying of track. That's just a pain in the butt. If you had something that could snap together, like Lionel, perhaps, I would be into O scale. Well, this layout here, that's a modular layout. If you know what you're doing, you could slap this layout together in about 20 minutes. These are all pre-made sections that all have plugs on them, and they all snap together, literally snap together. Of course, if you don't know what you're doing, it takes a lot longer to put together. But if you do know what you're doing, and they got the contract for all the layout at the World's Fair in 1939, based on this layout. You can come see this layout in my basement. Along with layouts, you need buildings. So you have model structures out in Santa Cruz, and he comes up with these beautiful, absolutely gorgeous buildings. They're very expensive. You could buy, the roundhouse was over $100 in the 30s. The engine house was like $125, and these are absolutely beautiful. He did pressed, heavy pressed cardboard with beautiful embossed details and colors. John Allen, you might know, the O-Gauge guy. He did all the photography for the catalog. And you'll see this engine house on his layout. Now, the World's Fair, you had two huge O-scale layouts. And they had a big auditorium that sat like a theater. So you'd have 300 people, and there would be the kind of the day of railroading. So the lights would be dim at the beginning, and you'd have the mail trains run by and the freight trains run by, and then it starts getting lighter, and you'd have the commuter trains run by, etc. And they're doing advanced depth perception. They're doing O scale in the front and double O in the background to give the perception of depth. And there was like a half-hour presentation. So and the other layout was railroads at work. This is one of the engines that ran on the big theater layout. Here's the building, the railroad. This was done by Walthers. Billy Bowen, who would work for Walthers, designed this large circular layout. So you'd line up around the circular layout, waiting to get into the theater to see the other layout. And then these layouts were 2-rail. So after the exposure of 2-rail here, outside 3rd rail pretty much died. Yes, the big clubs kept it for a while until they converted, but if you were going to start a layout, 2-rail was pretty much the way. But 2-rail really was introduced by Scalecraft in 1937, not in their O-Gauge line, but in their double O line. That was the first commercial use of 2-rail to the public. But O-Gauge or O-Scale started doing it in 1939. On the other side of the country, out in San Francisco and Treasure Island, Minton Cronkite did the Santa Fe layout. And up to about 3 months before the layout, they were going to have the big blue goose up there, but then they swapped it out for an E3. big O-scale layout, but the UP brought in HO layout. Yes, this is the first commercial use of HO in a large public exhibit. The nasty little gauge. Earl Ellison and Jerry White. Jerry White went on to be famous for making a wonderful drive, but they started in a much, much more humble beginnings out in the New Hampshire, producing these sandcast 10-wheelers or consolidation. Both of them in 1939 escaped to the West Coast to work for Roland Lobaugh. Here you have a switcher that predates the Lionel one, done out by Pratt. So you could buy this bronze 1764 scale switcher for $37.50. And of course, when the Lionel one came out a year later, selling for less, all built up, the market for this died immediately. A Hobbycraft store, which was one of the early hobby shops, Hobbycraft was Model Craftsman, their own in-house hobby store. So they would trade ads for product to fill the hobby store. And so this was one of their first offerings for a kit. They would give you a handful of castings, and then you'd go home and build this little switcher. Now, Walthers, who had the contract to make the layout in 1939, came up with this concept of interchangeability of parts, which today a lot of manufacturers just love the idea of taking this and using it for that, using it for all the other models, which is absolutely wonderful and time saving and production saving and R&D. It's just wonderful and great. Well, Temple Needler came up with this modular system. So on the photo here, you see there's gearboxes for each axle. And you just plug them all together and have a double gear reduction on your motor here. And you have a frame that looks like Swiss cheese on the side here because they have all these little aluminum dowels that go in there. And you just put it all together and it runs. Sort of. You have a lot of flex in it. So on paper, it was a great design. Absolutely marvelous. In reality, you have way too many moving parts to make a reliable engine. So it was available pre-war. Post-war, they were going to correct all the problems, and of course, that never happened. They also came up with Tenite. Tenite was an early plastic, and they used that for insulated drivers, which is marvelous. Over time, Tenite becomes brittle, and it breaks. And then once it's broken, it's useless. 1940, Walthers did their passenger cars and heavyweights, but Pomona came out with streamlined cars here in 1940 in 1764s, and they provided cars for some of the displays out in Treasure Island. They also came up with diesels. They were carried in the Roland Lobaugh catalog of 1941. Ready-built cars were going to set you back roughly $15 to $18. Here we have Frank Ellison, who was a standard gauge guy down in New Orleans, scrapped all the standard gauge and went into O-scale in 1939, ultimately building his Delta Lines layout, which was heavily publicized on many, many magazines and books that he wrote. And here you have a picture of his town called Raymondale. He wrote in such a way that it was understandable to people and people could associate and relate to the common language that he used and the simple techniques on how to build. And he was followed greatly by a lot of the modelers, influenced a lot of people. And fortunately, a lot of his layout still exists. You can come to my basement and see it. Here's Frank Ellison's Oblong Box Company from Donaldson. A reproduction of this was made. If anyone wants a copy of this, you can have a set. Just pay for the shipping and you can build it yourself. Roland Lobaugh, 1940-41 was the zenith, absolutely zenith. They had over a dozen engines. Here's Roland Root smiling. I mean, you'd be smiling too if you had this engine. They're absolutely beautiful. They run wonderfully. But of course, unfortunately, World War II happened and all this kind of came to an end. Roland was making money in screws prior, and screws and bolts. And even though post-war he came back with a hobby, it was just never the same. You never had the energy and the speed and the force to carry through that they did in the pre-war era. Bill Lenore, who had been working with Jack Ferris in scale model railways, broke out to his own in 1940. Jack Ferris sold out scale model railways to Macau, and Bill Lenore set on his own to do Saginaw. And he basically, in one of the ads, confesses that he was able to sell more engines in the first year than a model scale company was able to do it in 5 years. So if you produced a model that was reasonable and easy to put together, you would be successful and find a market. So he brought out these 3 Pennsylvania engines in 1940, 41. Then he was drafted, so that kind of ended all that. But Pennsylvania engines sold, okay? Stay away from Erie and Wabash, even though they're wonderful and great. Don't even think about doing the Indiana Harbor Belt. But if you make a Pennsylvania engine, it's going to sell and you're going to make money. So that's what he did, and he was successful here. Min Cronkite, his pinnacle layout in 1941, done in Q gauge, sponsored by the Santa Fe Railroad, who had their headquarters in Chicago. The layout lasted until 2000 in Chicago. Absolutely lovely layout. And as you can see, it's sparse in detail. Give yourself some space between those trees. You had the Grand Canyon there. You had different industries. It was a very successful layout, ran for a very, very long time. They did upgrade it. Again, it started with Q gauge in 1953. Bob Smith of CLW converted it to O gauge. During the war, you couldn't get metal. Somehow the government thought model trains were superfluous and did not need to be manufactured. So they were not able to do production of metal. So Bill Walters did what he does best. Kind of steal from this and steal from that and put it all together. And so he came up with these war baby engines using whatever motor he might be able to find, not necessarily a O gauge motor, but any kind of motor, and a lot of wood. And these war babies were available in the war. You never see 2 of the same because they were built, home built, and also depending whatever parts Bill had at that time, he would send out in the kit. After the war, Gordon Varney, who was an incredibly astute businessman, all about the bottom line, and he liked the idea of interchangeability in his trains, and also Walther's idea of the poly drive, capitalized on that, and he was going to jump into the O-scale world. Oh, it was going to be great. It was going to be marvelous. So the end of 1946, he comes up with this, and he also followed along in the Craftsman and Railroader for the idea of what to come out with. And he came up with this lovely little B&O 10-wheeler. So nice little steam engine, but small enough to ride on everyone's layout, but big enough yet to pull some cars. And it's all modular construction. So he spent some money on die casting, and it was a good, reliable, screw together type of kit. He puts together 1,000 of these. It makes a nice little toolbox, sells them for $100. They sell out immediately. Of course, there was a pent up, nothing was available during the war, everything. So it was just a pent up demand. They sell out immediately. Gordon then goes, more? Can we sell you guys more? Oh no, we're fine now. We're fine. We're good. We're good. We're good. The market was that small. So with 1,000 models, he flooded the market. It was over. It was over. So he cut his losses and sold off his entire O-scale market to Matthews, which would be GMC. And Gordon went on to cry all the way to the bank, making HO. But he learned his lesson. This is probably his only mistake he ever did. But the O-scale world capitalized greatly on this because GMC was able to do a great number, and then, of course, All Nation later, using these modular configurations to make many, many other trains from them. Heinz in the Milwaukee area, or I apologize, Detroit area, was friends with Bill Lenore, who did, of course, did Saginaw. So Bill Lenore designed the engines for Heinz, and he was going to come up with 4 engines. The Mikado was the first off the line, and he had Adams and Son produce the castings for him. There was some scuttlebutt regarding perhaps not payment of the bill. So the Mikado came out, and the Berkshire, which was to be the second engine, did not come out. So Adams kind of kept that for ransom, and then sold that separately through CLW. But ultimately later, Heinz partnered with Pierce up in the Detroit area to do the foundry on the other engines, coming out with the beautiful Pacific at the end, and then a consolidation. All designed by Bill Lenore. So they're really beautiful models. The Mikado, of course, was the most successful, very coming out on the tail in 47 and then the 080 came out. Nice models, fairly successful, and then Pierce continued manufacturing the 080 and the Mikado for a while. But the specific, lovely engine, but they never brought it out again, unfortunately. Adams basically brought out the diesels in 1764, which are basically recast from the Pomona line, which was pre-war. So the Pomona trains are 1764s. The Adams E-units are 1764s. These are big and heavy because they're cast bronze. So you have a cast bronze nose, you have a cast bronze top, you have a cast bronze back. But you only bought the nose and the casting pieces, and then you had to go to different people to buy the sides or the chassis or the motors. So Adams and Son would sell you this, and then Siebers would sell you the other components. So here you have Siebers in Kansas City would sell you a motor and then the brass sides. DMC, Diesel Modelcraft or Dallas Modelcraft down in Dallas would sell you etched sides for the diesel. So if you really wanted a diesel, you really had to work for it because you had to buy the castings from one person and this, and then you had to put it all together. Heavy bronze castings, you need a blowtorch to get it hot enough to be able to do decent soldering on it. So not the easiest thing for the home modeler. Exacta out in originally in Portland, and they moved around a little bit in California. In 1946, they come up with these beautiful molded copper cars. They're going to be one end all for all the gauges. So they come up with HO, double O, S gauge, and O scale. O scale was available in 1/4 inch and also 1764s. And by the end of 46, they realized that double O was dead and the S gauge market was pretty minuscule. So they just refined it to HO and 1764s and some 1/4 inch. But these are molded copper, quite lovely. Post-war, Walthers, the poly drive is dead. Alexander was going to partner with Walthers, but Alexander decided to do his own thing. And some of the Alexander castings for various freight cars went to various people, including Walthers, for like the depressed center car and a couple of the gondolas that Alexander used to make ended up in Walthers' hands. But he partnered with Baldwin out in Connecticut. And Baldwin took over the Bedell line, so the Bedell brick, and also the GG1, which were marketed by Walthers post-war, and they came out with an F unit, and then also this Fairbanks Morris switcher, which is quite nice and quite heavy. Bob Smith here in Chicago is contracted by Alco to produce the PA and comes up with a beautiful cast bronze PA in 1764s. He also gets the contract to build this train for the to upgrade the trains on the Museum of Science Industry in Chicago, and he chooses the Exacta cars, which are 1764, so he'd have a full 1764 set. And then, of course, he offered the engine himself in his normal lineup, cast bronze and then also or cast aluminum. And then in 49, again, contracted through Fairbanks Morris to bring out the model for displays, and then powering it up for commercial sales. Here you have, again, cast bronze, quite heavy. The castings are done by Adams out in Kansas. Here we have Matthews. Matthews was quite an entrepreneur, quite a salesman, quite a sleight of hand. But anyhow, he took over Varney's O-gauge line and a number of other O-gauge lines because post-war, HO was where you really wanted to be if you're going to make money. It's hard to compare the two gauges. If you again, you go back to the surveys that were in the Model Craftsman. Every year they're getting the pulse of what is going on in which gauge. And the last year that O gauge was the preferred, or O scale was the preferred scale to model in, was 1940. 1941, it was HO. And O scale has been slipping ground ever since. And they were spelling the death for it in post-war. Of course, it's still around, and they're still spelling the death, but it's still here, and we're still growing, and we're still happy it's still with us. And hopefully we can keep growing the numbers with O-scale Central and all the powerful advocates that are voicing for O-scale. But Matthews raised the flag for O-scale and expanded the Varney line, taking a couple strange turns. So he buys the Varney line. And the Varney engine initially was $99 for the kit. Well, Matthews initially tries to get some of his money back. So he sells it for half price on the public, into the public, which pisses off the public, pisses off the dealers because he was selling it for less than the dealers could buy. So he was able to successfully shoot himself in both feet right off the bat. Then he kind of recalibrates and brings out the train, offering it for $89. But the market's just not there. He comes out with in 48, he comes up with a Pacific, an Atlantic, a Mountain, which the O-scale market is wonderful and great, but when you're looking at $50 to $100 for a kit, and the average O-scaler at this time did not have 100 engines on his layout. You know, maybe he had 2 engines, and maybe he had 15 cars, and he was a happy man. These were not collectors. These were O-scale operators. So if you had a handful of engines, you were big time. So just because you come out with another engine, it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to do the expenditure to build it and to add it to your layout. And the market, again, was small. So Matthews became frustrated with the O-scale market in 1948. So he decides to pull all his dealerships and sell directly to the public. Well, the problem with that is the hobby shop business was doing just wonderful and great and expanding exponentially post-war. So Dad would take the kids on Saturday and go to the hobby shop and buy them a kit and maybe buy something, a trinket for himself. But if you're going to the hobby shop and you see all the wonderful things for sale, and O-scale's not there because Matthews pulled the market, all his product, you're not exposed to O-scale. So O-scale took a real nosedive by doing direct market because not everybody wants to buy through the mail. They would like to go to their corner hobby shop and purchase it. Well, if the hobby shop can't get the product, the hobby shop's not going to advertise O-scale. The hobby shop put the scales. So they rapidly went to HO.
Carrie, you're breaking up, and I'm not quite sure why.
magazine promoting this, and it's wonderful and great, but it's a very small market. Matthews tries to expand, bringing out he puts the money together, or at least promotes the Atwater die-cast diesels, which are absolutely marvelous and still with us today, and became a standard of the hobby for a long, long time. Atwater was out of Milwaukee with Boosie, but it really took Matthews to be able to put it on the map to get it in front of people. Out in California, you had Miller, George Miller, come up with Civil War type engines and introduce the Great Western line, starting in 48, and then making them until 1952. There was a small market for the Civil War era type of stuff. You had a number of custom builders. Jerry White leaves Lowball. He probably designed the post-war drive for Lowball, and then probably had some frustrations regarding Roland's lack of interest in promoting the O-scale world. So Jerry goes out on his own building custom locomotives. But Jerry, along with making a beautiful drive and building custom O-scale engines, but he also does a lot of HO engines and a few O engines because the market in O-scale was rather small. George Stock, the father of HO in America, started in 1929, first manufactured piece in 1935, offering the first kit in HO. Also does custom building in O-gauge in Philadelphia. Also, you'll find many, many, many O-scale pieces that are hand lettered by George Stock. George DeSorio, another custom builder in Pennsylvania, comes up with, again, selling Pennsylvania engines because Pennsylvania engines sell. John Grisina in the Connecticut area comes up with some very nice cast aluminum interurban cars, starting in 1948 and 49. He was available in pre-war, but he comes up with the kits post-war in 1764s, and they were quite successful in the traction world. John Wentz, an attorney, was fairly successful as an attorney, so he buys a house next to his home for his sister, and in the basement builds a big layout and starts making trains. He had been making trains pre-war, but in 1948 he comes up with these STs that are a little primitive, but he predates the Atwater engine. So these are a bit successful until the Atwater engines come out, and of course the sales on these fall off the charts. GMC expands in 1948 with their die-cast switcher, which was initially a Bob Smith design to be made in cast bronze. Matthews kind of steals the idea and comes out with it in die-cast. Of course, then Lionel gets pissed off and comes out with their own, but the beautiful die-cast SW has been around, and thousands of these have sold and are on many, many layouts. 48, GMC again expands the line through expanding clever use of reuse of the Varney pieces. Kencraft does these beautiful FA and F3s in cast bronze. These are absolutely gorgeous with lots of rivet detail, but unfortunately very few of these sold. Pittman comes out with trolleys in 49, marketing primarily to the tinplate world, but also a foot to the scale world. Of course, Pittman was responsible for doing a huge number of motors that were used in the O-scale world. Jim Taylor, initially a partner with Jim Thomas, a partner with John Taylor of Mantua, Mantua, and then ultimately Tyco fame, splits and goes on his own doing O-scale. He was a tool and die cast man, so he was able to come up with dies to make the consolidation on the 060 or the 040, which were very successful. The final big engine that GMC comes out with is the articulated cast bronze, using again clever use of all Varney parts. So that's actually a 10-wheeler disguise, or two 10-wheelers disguised as an articulated engine. But if you squint your eyes, it's a fairly successful engine. But coming out with this engine was pretty much the end of the line for Bill Matthews. By the end of 1950, the company collapses in on itself, going bankrupt. They expanded too fast for the market, bringing out too many product lines, and the market just did not supply it. Cutting back their dealer, exposing the O scale that way, really was a bad misstep. And so the hobby kind of goes into limbo. The GMC product is not available after 50 until there's an auction. A year and a half later. In 1950, Scalecraft is going to come racing back in, but 1950 is a bad year. There was a little bit of police action happening over in Korea, and some of the World War II stuff regarding limitations of metals started happening. So bronze and brass became limited in what you could do. Scalecraft was going to come out with this Northern in O scale, and they came up with a few models and released some of their old cars again, but production never really happened. And Elliott was making far too much money in the printing industry and basically divested himself of the O scale line and his 00 line. The O scale line, the engine, the Northern went to Bob Smith of CLW, and he introduced the engine back in like 56 or 57. $1950, little magazine called Whistle Stop really tried to promote O scale and O gauge. They were based out of Pittsburgh area, a small little magazine, trying to expand O scale with gauge and heart, gauge and scale, and also a lot of the trolley stuff. But the market again was just too small, so they struggled along for about 3 years, and then collapsed. 1953, when they collapsed, the whole industry kind of took a nosedive. Tinplate trains. If you read Model Craftsman, and they talk about their ups and downs, the industry took a nosedive in 53 and really didn't recover until 1970. Baldwin, who purchased Bedell in 1944 and then marketed under Walthers, continued through the 50s in a small way. They took over this line for a cast bronze Niagara. Very, very few numbers of those were made. They also came out with an E8, which is quite heavy, all cast bronze. Louis Barnett of International Models in New York City had been importing things from Japan, starting pre-war, bringing in pantographs, rail, light bulbs, decorative things for your layout. At the time when they're importing things from Japan in the late 30s, there was a rally cry from all the American manufacturers, don't buy that cheap imported crap. Of course, when they bombed Pearl Harbor, that took care of importing anything from Japan for a while. But post-war, he starts importing things again with the International line. Most of their stuff is very, very cheesy. Not really a good product at all, but they would do custom building. So depending on who was building it on their kitchen table over in Japan or in their garage, if they got the good builder, they built some Challengers, and they're really quite nice. And this was going to set you back just under $200, $195, which is like real money at that time. This is like 52 to 53. A couple years later, when Max Gregg would come in, he would beg and steal from the best of the scale craftsmen in Japan to put together his line. And they were bringing in things for like $225 for a decent engine and much less for a smaller engine. So International kind of faded from the O scale world because this inferior product just would not cut it anymore. But he tried to have his feet on both sides of the rail, both bringing in commercially with 3-rail and then also trying to do 2-rail conversion. At the end of 1951, All Nation buys out GMC in basically a fire sale. Initially, they were just going to strictly sell off stock, but they're talked into going to manufacturing. So the first train that they bring out that's new is the American, the 440, and they continue the line for a long time, and it's still continued today in Pennsylvania. So we're quite happy to have the line still with us, and it's the basis for O scale. A lot of people have All Nation products running on their layouts today. Levon Kemlon of Chemtron started in 1948, bringing out various models in various gauges. But by 54, he was really the dean of lost wax casting. He was really a master of that. And he had this beautiful CP Huntington, which you could buy the kit for, or he also came up with a couple diesels. He was also imported from Japan, but he was the leg up to do the lost wax casting for great detail. Roland Lowball on some of his later pieces of Ellis would use a lot of the lost wax casting design. Bernard Coben, you had a lot of scratch builders at this time. Corbin out in Iowa modeled Burlington, and he did sell some of his models, but again, very, very small numbers. But you have some very fine builders that were building their own product, offering a few scale, but again, the numbers are minuscule regarding what they produce. For example, like some of the Alexander pieces that were done in the 30s, he would do a production of make pieces for 20 kits and then sell 10. So very, very, very small numbers of these things actually were sold. Post-war, Ellis admits to producing 200 components for the Roland Lowball post-war Challenger and for the Greenbrier. So they made enough components to make enough kits for 200. Whether or not they sold 200, we'll never know. And from that, we don't know how many were actually built. So very, very small numbers. In comparison, go back to 1940, when Mantua comes up with their first die-cast Yardbird, a little 040 engine, which sells for $17.50, breaking down, cutting the $25 kind of price break that they were at prior. In the first 9 months, he sells 10,000 copies. So you can't compete with that kind of number. O gauge was minuscule compared to HO. So we don't have to deal with quantity in O scale. We only like the quality. Bill Lenore, who started in the 30s, continued doing custom building and lasted to the 70s. Here's an example of his one-off aeroliner that he did, Aerotrain, for 1955. You can go to Iowa and see his layout. He ultimately lived in an airplane hangar in Florida, and his layout was preserved, and it's in an Iowa museum. And I want to thank you very much for your patience listening to me. Go to my channel, YouTube channel. You can see a lot of the trains here running. On YouTube, I'm known as Leonard Williams, but if you go to Vintage Model Trains, I'm there. I run 2-rail and outside 3rd rail. And I do want to do a caveat. This is history, so research is constantly going on. So if I state a date or a name, tomorrow we might learn something that might change a lot of this. So I'm very grateful for your patience, but do some of your own research. It's a fun hobby. The hobby's gone a long ways, made a lot of advancements, but you can easily learn from the past before you step into the future. Thank you very much. And again, go to the YouTube channel. You'll see a lot of the trains running. Thank you very much,
Carrie,
David.
that was just absolutely fabulous. You must be exhausted, first of all, because it was a real marathon. And I thank everybody who has had the stamina to stay with us. I know we lost a fair number of folks, and I assume that most of that was because of the length, but it is so much meat on the presentation that it is just great. And I want to thank you very much. We are running on minus minutes, and I'm going to get beat up again by Eric Peterson and people who tell me not to make this thing run so long. But I absolutely cannot close it out without at least giving people the opportunity to raise your hands and ask Kerry some questions. Obviously, you've got his email if you want to have follow-up. So go do the same thing we did last time, using your react little heart there to click on any questions that you might have. He may have answered all the questions, so we may have nothing to follow up on at this point. Anybody have any questions?
David, thank you. And Carrie, thank you. A wonderful presentation. Outstanding.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, it was great. Okay, I don't see any questions, and I'm happy to give Carrie a breather. We had just a couple of things to finish off, and then we will let everybody go, although we will stay on the call for people who want to kibitz after the formal end of the meeting. But I had a couple of questions in the chat room about whether the program will be recorded. It will be recorded. It will be on YouTube and available as a link through our oscalecentral.com website. We will have next month a presentation that we did not get to today from Jim Cantor, who's going to talk to us about ways that each of us can be our own promoters for the scale. Jim lives his enthusiasm for the scale and does some really neat things that we can all learn from. In terms of finishing up, be advised that we have the next month's presentation on June 15th. We know both that Jim Cantor will be involved, and we also know that Scott Mann of Sunset Third Rail will be on the call. If you like what you have seen, by all means, tell your friends and fellow modelers about it. Our program is gradually growing. I think our high water mark today was 63 people. And if you chart the graphs, you will see that it is just gradually going up. We thank everybody for their support. We hope also that you will consider joining O-Scale Central. We are doing this very kind of programming. We are doing a lot of outreach beyond the O-Scale 2-rail market to let people in other scales know about O-Scale 2-rail. And with that, I think we are ready to end the formal part of the meeting, but there are always some folks who want to stay on for a last question, a last comment, talk with each other. This is a small community, but close-knit. A lot of the people on the call know each other, but we will, at this point, stand adjourned in the formal meeting. See you all again on June 15th, if you can make it back, and bring your friends if you do. And we will keep the recording on, but this is, at this point, moving into what we loosely call the good and welfare part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank
Does anybody have questions or comments? I see Kel Shearson from New Zealand is with us. I see Tony Custer is with us. Some of you may not know that Tony has always been an O-scale fan and is currently doing a project layout with the Wabash branch line with the Wabash moguls. And he's promised to come on at a point in the future and tell us about that. I saw Jim Kello on the call before. I don't know whether Jim is still here. He has just retired from Nutrax Modeling, and Nutrax Modeling is coming up with a magazine, which will be an all-scale magazine. O-Scale Central is a sponsor of that magazine. He has been a good contributor as well. One of the problems with singling out people for Hayas is that you always miss somebody, and I apologize for that. In this realm, everybody is important. Everybody is a celebrity. Anyway, thank you all. If anybody has any comments or questions, stay on. Otherwise, we will adjourn when we fall below the critical mass. Questions or comments?
I have a question about the 1764th being used for a measurement in model railroading. I've never heard of this before.
Well, you're probably just not old enough, Andrew. That's all I can tell you. That was 1764th was big, and you got to be careful with some models and manufacturers. You think you're getting a 1/4 inch to the foot, and all of a sudden you find it was one of the 1764th variables. It doesn't look from 5 feet away like there's a difference. But if you stand an O-scale model 1:48 against the 1764th, it's a real different ball game. Carrie, who I hope is still here, yeah, Carrie pointed out that Lobaugh actually did a pre-war Southern Pacific 060 in 1764, came out with the same engine, I think, right after the war, in 1/4 inch to the foot. And a number of companies had both 1764th and O-scale. Carrie, you want to pitch in on that?
If a standard example is if you take your 80-foot Pullman or coach, it's a 20-inch car normally in O-scale. In 1764th, you're up to 21 inches or 21 and a half inches. It is a dramatic difference. It's wider, it's higher. Your wheels everything's just bigger. And when you look at it from the front, you see the proper overhang. So the debate goes back to the mid-30s, but unfortunately, 1/4 inch won out, or maybe that was a good thing. I don't know. But if you go to a number of my videos and just type in 1764 in my under my name, you'll see like a 1/4 inch Hudson, Icken Hudson compared to a mini scale Hudson, which is 1764, and it is quite a dramatic difference. And when you start mixing the cars, you have big and small, big and small, big and small. So it was a deal primarily in the 30s and early 40s, and to some degree a little bit after that, but it pretty much died out to 1/4 inch.
I find it somewhat curious in the fact that as a machinist building more than a dozen locomotives and about 50, 60 freight passenger cars, you cannot use fractions. They're totally inaccurate, and you need to use the decimal system. I find it rather curious, measurement system.
I bought a collection for a fellow. I'm not a collector, but this was the old stuff I really wanted to see preserved. About 50 cars and a couple of doodlebugs and such, and a lot of them in pretty rough shape. But in going through, I found there were all different sizes. And so I tried to figure out a good way to tell if it was 1764 or O scale. Found the best way is on a box car. The width between the drip rails on the top of on the edges of the roof is about 9 feet 9 inches on most pre-war boxcars, or in some post-war boxcars. So that's 2.44 inches in 148. If it's bigger than that, like 2.6 inches, it is 1764s. And so I looked through that, about half my cars are actually 1764s. Now, interesting, actually, most of them were for outside third rail because there's no insulated wheels. So I gotta have to build me an outside third rail loop to run these things. But it's been kind of fun job so far.
Well, I've got a comment at some place about somebody would wish they'd go from Proto 48 to the 1764. I'm rather quite curious because when I make my freight cars, passenger cars, locomotives, I go to the plans and they are exactly what the size is. If it's 48 feet, it's 48 feet. If it's 32 feet, it's 32 feet for everything. So the width and size of the drivers, everything. And the only way I can do it is by decimals. I just find it really curious, the fractions.
Yeah, the old-fashioned way, I guess. I hate fractions, so that's why I do metric.
So, question on these: does that actually change it from 1 to 48 to 1 to something else?
It's
Harry?
approximately 145th.
Is it the European 145th, the German O scale, basically, Ben?
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 7 millimeter.
Now, 7 millimeters, 1 to 43.5. That's British O. German O is 145th scale.
The Australians, I think, are 1 to 45 also.
Yeah, let's do British stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Boo. I'll comment too that in Sweden, I am from Sweden originally. Anybody doing Swedish modeling will use the scale 1 to 45, which is pretty much the same as 1764th.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense then.
And that's the same as the German you mentioned.
Yeah, German O. Okay.
The actual 145th scale be 6.73 millimeters per foot, and they kind of vary a lot. And I know British is 7 millimeters per foot because they generally have smaller models, and that fit the old motors better. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of very,
yeah, because the 140 the 1764 works out to 6.746 millimeters. So yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
Bridget Eden has her, or maybe somebody else is using her email with a hand up, and that person is muted. So if you got a question or comment, unmute yourself. All right, we seem to have a time warp on that. We'll move along. I have one little curious story. Carrie's presentation talked about Minton Cronkite's Santa Fe layout and how it changed. I think he said in 1953, deviating from the original 4-foot 8.5 gauge with very thin wheels and small flanges. I happened to come across a Santa Fe engine, which I'm virtually certain is from that layout. And it is, without being called Proto 48, it was a Proto 48 exact scale gauge with very narrow tires, very small flanges, and was really quite well done. Well, I'm not a Proto 48 modeler, and I figured that Jim Cantor would get more use out of it than I did, so I gave it to him, and I assume he still has it somewhere. But Proto 48 in other guises goes back farther than people might think. Anybody else got any questions or comments? We can come back to Bridget Eaton if that person will unmute himself, herself. The hands up. I don't see anything. All right. I think we have.
I have a question.
Okay.
An historical question. And one of the things I've been researching is at one point, NMRA standards 4 were 32 millimeters between the rails in O in the 50s. At some point, they switched to 1.25 inches. Slight difference. I mean, not much. You're talking a fraction of a millimeter. But I was wondering if anybody knows when that change came about, when this historically understands when that came about. Because I've asked the standards and conformance guys at MRA, and they don't know, seem to know, because they don't respond to my inquiries. So, and so this is kind of just a fine point I'm trying to nail down. So
I'll give you a corollary that may not apply, but in the live steam world, if you have 1.5 inch scale live steam train, if you are modeling in Maryland and south and west, it's 1.5 inches between the rails. But if somebody had the bright idea up in Pennsylvania and further in New England, it's 1.5 from the inside to the outside of the rail. In other words,
What are you
the
talking about?
width of the rail and the measurement on one side.
Oddly, the 7.25 inch they use in the East was kind of an international standard. And I'm trying to find how 7.5 inch gauge started for live steam. As far as I can tell, it was a misprint somewhere in a magazine, and a lot of the West Coasters ran with it. And that's how we got 7.5 inch gauge. I personally run 7.5 inch because that's what's popular.
It actually goes back to Daney. Daney was a manufacturer of trains in the Colorado area, and he sold a train to a gentleman in Michigan in 1934 or 35. And when he was asked to measure the gauge for two gentlemen in the Chicago area who ultimately built two Hudsons, Anchor was one of the gentlemen. He went to measure his gauge, and he measured it like a tin plater would measure it, from the middle of the railhead to the middle of the railhead, and came up with 7.5. And hence 7.5 was born here in Chicago.
Interesting.
Starting in the late 30s.
Wow.
The track for 7.5 inch is inside to inside.
Yes, now it is. Yes. But how it was originally measured up in Michigan on a 7.25 inch railroad was they measured it middle of the railhead to the middle of the railhead to come up with 7.
If you measure from the outside to the inside, you get the same thing. Yeah, 7.25.
Yeah.
Screwy.
Yeah, what's interesting is that Walt Disney, his backyard railroad was 7.25 inch gauge. And but most of the ones built after that time in Southern California and Northern California, where I'm from, were all 7.5. So it's this interesting little difference that makes it very difficult when you got two separate gauges, sort of like NMRA and Proto 48, same thing. I tried for years to get those to run the same track. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I think we are
difference.
coming to the end. Going once, going twice.
David, did anybody have an answer to my question? That got hijacked. Did anybody get an answer?
I don't. Try your question again, Philip.
The one on when did we change from 32 millimeters between the rails, which we initially adopted in the 50s NMRA, to 1.25 inch for O scale. I have a source that says we were 32 millimeters between the rails in the 1950s in the store, and I'm trying to find when that shift happened. Nobody has. I'll find somebody eventually knows when that happened, but hopefully they're still breathing. But yeah.
I suspect at some point you will find publications from the Standards Committee for NMRA that can be obtained perhaps through the NMRA library, which would at least give you the time that it changed, and it might give you the reason for the change. We have been somewhat frustrated at communicating with the NMRA about the special interest groups of NMRA. There are apparently a paucity of records and a paucity of interest on the part of NMRA to be digging back into the special interest groups. I suspect that their standards program, which has been around for a long time and gets a lot of attention, would be better in that regard. But
yeah, people change and history gets lost. as people pass. So yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All
All right.
right.
Thank you.
One of the old NMRA documents when they were establishing the standards and the special interest groups and such are still around somewhere in a box. It's really interesting to have them preserved and digitized. It's just fascinating information for history of the group, you know.
Yeah, I know they're digitizing all the back magazines. That is a ongoing project with them. So they're trying to. Most of the old ones, I think, are available in some form or another. Maybe not online yet, but that's a long-term goal. I know from the current head of NMRA that all that gets digitized and available to members as part of their value of membership. So
Great. Yeah, my dad went to the 1939 World's Fair at Treasure Island in San Francisco and told us all about it as kids, you know. And he was saying about how Santa Fe had a big layout and Southern Pacific had a big layout. And his dad and his uncle worked for Southern Pacific, so they had the family pass with all over the country and that. But I did not know about the gauge as possibly Q gauge, not O gauge. I did some research on that. That is really fascinating.
yeah.
All right, guys, we are done. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time and attention and contribution.
Thank you much.
See you. Hopefully, we'll see you next month.
Thank you, David.
Take
Thank
care.
you.